Today I'm going to do 5 upgrades to this airbrush here and going to make it much easier to hold and use. The first 2 are just going to be simple adjustments, and then the next 3 are going to get a bit weird. I'm going to use some steel files and some green stuff with those 3. So you might not want to follow along at home because I'm not sure if it's going to turn out well or be a complete disaster. I'm Dave and let's get cracking. All right, so the first upgrade I'm going to do is to loosen off this paint limiter. So currently the trigger can only go back that far, which is not the full way, it's about halfway. If you loosen off this screw on the back, and not all airbrushes have this, but mine does. As you loosen this off, see how now the trigger can come all the way back? So before it could only get to about here, and now all the way. So I'm going to have mine all the way back because I'm not afraid of going full bore with my paint. Second upgrade is, take this back cover off, I'm going to make the trigger pull a bit softer. This screw holds the spring that tensions the trigger. So I have weak software engineer fingers and I find the trigger a bit difficult to pull back without issue. So as I unscrew this, it loosens off that spring a bit and it's actually a lot easier to pull back. Try that out on your airbrush and see how it goes. Yeah, so that is like way softer now. Obviously, if you like a stiff trigger, then you can screw it all the way in. If you're finding these tips useful, then please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to get more awesome tips like this. Thanks. Alrighty, before the next step, we're going to have to break the airbrush down a little bit more. So I'm going to remove the needle and then take the needle cap off. Struggle a little bit in taking the nozzle cap off. And then finally, I'm going to use the world's smallest spanner to carefully take the nozzle off. For the next step, have a look in the cup of my airbrush and you'll see that between the cup and the main body of the airbrush, there's some mold lines. And those are what I'm going to fix in step 3. They collect paint, which dries and makes it a bit more annoying to clean. So to remove them, I'm going to get in there with my file and do what I can to file them down. I'm just sort of going all the way around that hollow there and trying to file out those mold lines as best I can without doing too much damage. This is why we had to take the needle and the whole front of the airbrush off, so we don't get any of those metal filings stuck in the nozzle, because that would be a pretty big disaster. And I'm just going to go until I feel like I have done enough. I don't think I'm going to get it perfect, but it's definitely better. I'm going to use some water to flush any of the fragments of metal out of the cup and airbrush. And remember guys, if you shake it more than 3 times, then you're just playing with it. All right, for step 4, we're gonna start to get really weird. I have this issue with the trigger that once I get about halfway through the pull, my finger starts to slip because there's nothing to grip onto. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give it a little bump at the back of the trigger here. So I have a little bit of something extra to hold against. Because I don't like putting my finger at the front of the trigger, which I know a lot of people do. But I like to actually have my finger on the top here. So I'm gonna try and make that a bit easier for myself with some green stuff. The trigger is a bit of a chrome dome. So to get rid of that shiny surface, I'm gonna scratch it up with my file a bit. And that should help the green stuff stick to the trigger a bit better. Okay, let's mix up some green stuff and I'm gonna do it at the speed of light. Okay, we're gonna take a little bit of that green stuff and form it onto the back half of the trigger. And we're gonna form it on the top and sort of around the sides and back as well, so it kind of gets more of a grip on the trigger. And then try to form it into sort of a ramp shape.
as we're working the green stuff, we want to make sure that we keep the cutouts at the back of the trigger clear, because otherwise it will interfere with the body of the airbrush when it's fully pulled back. I'm just working the green stuff more and more until it looks like the back of a skateboard and just has a bit of a lip for my finger to grip to.
There we go. I'm pretty happy with that now, actually. So I'm just going to leave that and go on to the next tip.
For the next step, I'm going to put the back on.
Now, as I mentioned before, I have weak software engineer hands, so I find this airbrush a little bit difficult to grip in like a sort of pencil grip like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little finger rest here for my middle finger.
Firstly, I'm just doing a bit of a dry fit, trying to figure out exactly where the green stuff will go. Now, just as before, we're going to use the file to scratch off the surface of the airbrush, so the green stuff has a nice rough surface to stick to. Then I'm taking the rest of my green stuff and forming it into a sort of triangular prism and going to push that onto the side of the airbrush where I've scratched off the surface. And then I'm just going to work it and make it have a sort of shelf for my finger to rest on. I then do some further fittings by holding the airbrush in my hand and just keep working the green stuff till I've found a comfortable position for it. And then I keep doing some final adjustments and fittings, and then I am happy with it. Now, I do have a bonus tip coming up actually, guys, but before then, let's look at the final result. So we're now 24 hours later and the green stuff has cured, and I'm actually really happy with it. With the modification to the trigger, I have a lot better grip on it now through the full pull of the trigger. And my middle finger and ring finger have a much better grip on the body of the airbrush now as well.
Bonus tip time, guys. There's one more thing you can do with your airbrush to make it work better, and that's to make sure your paints are really, really well mixed. Now, if you want to mix your paints really well, I recommend you get a vortex mixer. So check out my video up here on the vortex mixer I have, and you can see how well it mixes paints, because it is pretty awesome and it's really going to help with your airbrush as well. Cheers.